Well, good morning. Welcome to Coffee with the Pastor. I'm glad you're joining me this morning. We're in Mark chapter 6. We're finishing up chapter 6 today. If you remember last time, we read the count and talked about the count of Jesus feeding the 5,000. That was 5,000 men, didn't include the women and children. So we're not really sure how many thousand he fed there that day. And you remember the great miracle where he took just the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish and blessed them, and they continued to eat until they were all full. I had 12 basketfuls left over. Well, after that, Jesus sent the disciples on across the Sea of Galilee, and he went to another place to kind of be by himself. And we're going to see one of the great miracles. Obviously the bread feeding of 5,000 was a great miracle. This is going to be a great miracle as well. Well, let's just read it, beginning with verse 45 of Mark chapter 6. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. And they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus, and they ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. They had this huge miracle scene with the feeding of the multitudes. Jesus sends the disciples on across the other side of the lake, or the Sea of Galilee. He finds a solitary spot, and then he looks out, and the winds have come up, and the disciples are having a hard time. Apparently the waves are up, and it must have been a pretty good storm, because these guys were fishermen. They were out on the lake all the time, and they were having trouble. So Jesus walks on the water out to them. Jesus walking on the water, one of the great miracles. And he walked out to them, and they didn't recognize him. They thought he was a ghost. And so they were terrified. And Jesus said, "Don't be scared, it's me." He gets on the boat, and the winds die down, and on. And Mark puts an interesting comment in there. He says, they did not understand the meaning of the loaves and the bread. The disciples had seen this huge miracle, and yet weren't still willing to trust that Jesus could walk on water, that he would walk out to them in their time of need, in their time of trouble. He said they didn't understand what was going on. And he said that their hearts were hardened, which meant that they weren't getting it in here. 2 or 3 things for us today is we need to get it. We need to understand that Jesus can do anything in our lives ours. He can be there for our time of need. We need to believe in him and realize he's got everything under control and that he can do anything. The other thing that I think is very significant is not to live your life terrified, not to live your life in fear. So many people today live their lives in fear. And we're to live our lives by faith. By faith. We trust in God, we trust in Jesus, and we live that way. And it's significant to live by faith, not by fear. And I hope that today you will not be like the disciples and harden your heart towards Jesus. You won't live in fear, but you'll trust Jesus, and you'll trust that he's going to take care of us, and you'll trust that he'll do the miracles in your life that you need. And I know that will help you have a blessed day. Well, tomorrow we'll get into chapter 7, one of my favorite chapters of Mark, actually. And you'll see why when we get into it. But hope you can read ahead a little bit to read Mark 7, and I hope you have a blessed day. And I'll see you tomorrow.